06. We're going to discuss 2.1 contract matter, 2.1 contract matter individual employee, 2.2 contract matter individual employee, 2.3 legal matter district, 2.4 district matter succession planning, and 2.5 Board of Education matter succession planning. Thank you so much. We'll see you in a bit. I need a motion too. I need a motion. So moved. And a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. Sorry. We'll see you in a bit. Welcome everybody to the Board of Education meeting for Tuesday, December 6th, 2022. We had entered into executive session at 7:05 and we discussed District Matter 2.1, individual employee, 2.2 contract matter, individual employee, 2.3 legal matter district, and 2.4 district matter succession planning, and 2.5 Board of Education matter succession planning. And if I could have everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So this is a very happy and exciting night for everyone, for all of us on the board and here in the district. But before we get to that, I'm just going to do a little business. Let's see, just going to ask if there are any comments from the public this evening. Okay, hearing none. I'm going to ask for, we had a revision, we didn't have a revision. No. So there is a adoption of the agenda this evening. Can I have an motion to adopt?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. And can I have a motion for tonight's consent agenda, items 6.1, consent agenda special services 7.1, consent agenda 8.1, and 9 special report recognitions. Oh no, that's we didn't get to that. That's the good part for tonight. So just for the consent agendas, 6, 7, and 8. I got it very excited. Can I have a motion to approve those for this evening?
Second.
A second. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our special report this evening of all the recognitions that we're going to celebrate. So let's see, first we're going to go for the, a very special and important night for our district. We're very happy to, for our district, our community, one that the board and the administration looks forward to every year. We are very excited and privileged to welcome our distinguished list of cum laude inductees, our National Merit semifinalists, and our National Merit Commended students for the 2022-2023 year, as well as our faculty cum laude inductee, Ms. Catherine Eshu. So we're very excited for them for this evening. To be honest, distinguished list is to have achieved such an amazing accomplishment. It is truly incredible. To have done so during the struggles and the difficulties and the disruptions for the last few years during the pandemic is incredible. Really, truly it is. We are so excited to celebrate you all this evening. It is an incredible accomplishment. And I know Jen has a few words also.
Just a few words. I know, raise your hand if you have homework to get to tonight and you're coming here and excited to be here, but you know what's looming ahead when you get home. So I want to be conscious of our students, our scholars, and our scholar athletes who have work to do tonight. And if you don't have work to do tonight, good for you. So cum laude, I'd like to start with those students first. We had 17 Byram Hills High School seniors who were honored for academic achievement and were inducted into the Cum Laude Society this year. Tonight, the board and I really get to celebrate these top 10% of our senior class, the scholars and inductees, who reflect outstanding achievement and attainment of scholarship. Founded in 1906, just a little before I was born, the Cum Laude Society honors the academic achievements in secondary schools And we are one of only about 24 public high schools who have cum laude chapters. And according to their organization, the vast majority of the 382 chapters are in private schools in the US and several other countries as well. So to be in the top 10% of Byram Hills students is no easy feat. We understand the intense rigor that our students have put themselves through, have dedicated themselves to. And I know, just from knowing so many of these students, that this is not about being in the top 10% of the class. It is, I mean, that's a nice thing, right? But it is also about honoring what you want and what you believe in and what you want to study and what you want to move toward and learn and make a part of your life. So it's not just about checking boxes, because those who check boxes don't get this kind of achievement. This achievement comes from being passionate about what you do and liking what you do. And when I see our inductees, I see scholars who are truly interested in their fields. I have no doubt that each one of you will go on to your careers in your lifetime and will be able to choose careers because you like them. Not just go into careers because you feel like those are the only options that are available to you. And that's kind of a special thing to be able to do. I know so many adults, I'm not included in that group, who don't like their jobs, right? They don't like what they went to school for and what they're spending their days doing. And I feel like today's students and students in Byram Hills and the opportunities you have, you're doing what you love. And that is something I couldn't be more proud of for your parents who have offered you that opportunity and bringing you here and in allowing you to soar to your highest potential in the things that you care about. So while I commend you tonight for being in the top 10% of your class, my wish for you is that you get to continue to pursue what you like. Because then you will be like me, although I didn't really pursue this when I was young, I have to be honest. But you'll be like me one day and you'll say, I absolutely love what I do for a living, right? That's the goal, in the end, to spend every day doing what you love. So, we also had Jess Shaw, a teacher, as our keynote speaker, and she gave an inspiring message to create opportunities and enlist the people in your life. And the cum laude induction was also run by Sandy Apt, who actually started that organization for Byram Hills, and although she's retired, she continues to run that organization for us because it's so meaningful for this district and for all of our students. So thank you to Sandy Apt. Tonight we also have our National Merit Commended students, representing the top 4% of students. We had 8 students commended in National Merit. The scholarship program is an academic competition for recognition and scholarship started in the 50s, still before I was born. Approximately 1.5 million juniors entered this program when they took the PSATs. So can you imagine, amongst 1.5 million juniors, what an accomplishment. And we have the National Merit semifinalists. 8 seniors from the school have been named in this competition, and there were 1,600 or so students who were semifinalists in the country. And our students are distinguished in the group of the top 1% of high school seniors. National Merit Scholarships are going to be notified in the spring, and it's more than 32, parents count, $32 million in scholarships. That would be a really beautiful thing. I want to congratulate all of you on these achievements and tell you how proud we are of you as a school district. You have students who are in the years behind you who are watching you. This is where they say lead by example, and you are leading them. And they look to you and everything that you have done to get them to where they want to be. So thank you for being an inspiration to them as well. So I hope these achievements represent to all of you that your parents and the faculty, staff, and administration have done everything with the Board of Education at the helm to give you opportunities. Nobody made you who you are today but you, but all of the people around you gave you the opportunity to be that person, and I'm so glad you were able to do that for yourselves, your school, your family, and all of us here. So congratulations, and now we have the calling of the names. Tim Kaltenecker will call you up, and then after we have this cum laude, national merit, and national merit commended students and finalists, then we will move on to tennis, our scholar athletes. Oh, germs to myself.
So we will call
Is
up
that
the
fair?
students one at a time. They will line up behind here, and certainly at any
We're taking
opportunity,
a handshake.
you can take pictures. So we will start with Joshua Arnold, National Merit Commended.
Remember the directions. Just come to me and I'll show you where to go. You waste your time on your school. Figure out taking
Graduate, want a handshake or yet?
Chloe Bernstein, cum laude. And Sydney Black, cum laude and National Merit Commended. Milena Chan, cum laude. Ethan Cherry, National Merit semifinalist. Massimo Kalela Albino, National Merit Commended. Allison Cooper, cum laude.
This one. No, oh, you were there. Yay!
Abby Eichelbeck, cum laude. Alaska Fairbanks, cum laude, National Merit semifinalist. Lily Feldman, cum laude. Eliza Hammond, cum laude and National Merit commended. Callie Higgins, cum laude. Alexander Kahn, National Merit semifinalist. Mihir Kumar, National Merit semifinalist. Casey Marianek, cum laude. Remy Matza, cum laude and National Merit semifinalist. Samantha Milowitz, cum laude and National Merit semifinalist. Lindsay Miller, cum laude. Peter Mon, National Merit commended. Caleb Palapalil, cum laude and National Merit commended. Isabel Sampier, cum laude. Max Teitelbaum, cum laude and National Merit commended. Kelsey Vaquero, cum laude and National Merit semifinalist. Clara Weil, National Merit semifinalist. And Christopher Yu, National Merit commended. Also, I'd like to acknowledge our faculty inductee, English teacher, Catherine Eshu.
Yeah, we're gonna any of your hands. So breathe on this. All right, ready everyone? And 2, 3, smile. Okay? There's no flash, so we have no idea. All right, any other parents? Everybody look to your parents.
Anyone still need a pick?
Congratulations.
Yay! About 5 more minutes. Just take a seat and wait for our tennis scholar athletes. Thank you. It is
Okay. Moving on, we are now also going to recognize our girls varsity tennis team. To accomplish a state championship 1 year is incredible. To do it 2 years in a row is unbelievable. We couldn't be more proud. Coach Racanelli and the girls from the tennis team becoming 2 years in a row the New York State Public High School Athletic Association state champions for the 2nd year in a row. And we also want to recognize that our doubles team state champions as well, Chloe Bernstein and Jenna Kleinerman.
So just a few words from me. I never knew anything about tennis until I met all of you. And I have to say that I still don't know a lot, but I know so much more than I ever did before, and I know the feeling of a parent's pride, even though you're not my children technically, of when I saw you achieve these milestones. So all of the accolades, you know, coming to the district office to have a superintendent, lunch, waiting, and your buses getting escorted off of a highway, all of your parents and your families there cheering you on, just exactly the dose of support that you needed to do what you needed to do. We didn't have a girls' state championship ever before last year. So for that to happen in Byram Hills one time is pretty amazing. But I remember that Coach Racanelli said when we had the parade and then we went to the sign in the town, he said a few words. Do you remember what it was? We'll be back. What is it? We'll be back. We'll be back. And sure enough, you were back for the 2nd year in a row. And to do this 2 years in a row with not all of the same students that you had the year before is also pretty amazing. So to see you on a float going through your town, knowing everybody in this town and this school district is so proud of you. That sign that when you're, you know, in your 50s, you can drive back with your families into Armonk if you're not already living here, and I have my great-grand students. You can drive by that sign and say, I was a part of that. I was a part of that history of Byram Hills. So thank you so much for letting us celebrate you. Because I know there were a lot of celebrations to be had. Your parents being that day watching you march through the town or go on that float. The PTSA decorating that float for you with some members of the JV team. Thank you to Abby Woodworth for getting that organized for us as she always does. And Brett Alcantara for helping out so much at all of those events. I think that you all have seen him everywhere and he's been orchestrating every step that you all make. So Rob Castagna, a very proud director of physical education and athletics who was there for the entire ride with you also. We are humbled by you, by your accomplishments, and I always talk about doing the thing you love. This is exactly the kind of thing you can do when you're 20, 30, 40, until you hit pickleball. You can keep playing tennis and just enjoy it. And I'm so glad that you have and that you've seen such victories with that. So with that, we would like to call you up to have a picture with the Board of Education. I know. Anything you're comfortable with, an elbow and, well, not hand, whatever.
All right, let's welcome our girls varsity tennis team. Let's start with Elizabeth Albright. Lily Anshin.
Behind Mr. Lee.
Chloe Bernstein. Jordan Bernstein.
It's the trifecta.
Yes.
Daphne Bernstein. Annika Bobra. Allie Cooper. Dahlia Flores. Rebecca Geller. Danny Goldman. Jenna Kleinerman. Justine Moresco. Lindsay Miller. Eliza Moy. Emerson Pace. Lila Rapp. Romy Schweitzer. Sky Smith.
Take this one. Good.
Julia Solar. Allie Waxman. Ashley Weissman. And Coach Mike Racanelli.
Hurry up, Mike, the girls are waiting.
Let me
Comes up.
enjoy this moment.
Congratulations, Coach.
that camera first. Ready? 1, 2. And cheese. And twist to parents. And cheese. And pat your neighbor on the shoulder. And go home. Thank you. Congratulations, we're so proud of you.
Okay, so after that wonderful celebration of our students and our tennis team, we are here now returning with 10.1, our special report, curriculum conversation and literacy study K through 5. And I'm going to throw it over to Tim and our lovely case talk.
Thanks for being here. Let me get my microphone closer. There we go. And Kay, can you hear okay? Were you able to hear what Lara said?
I can hear you, but I had difficulty hearing her. I mean, I strained my ears here.
Okay.
Sorry.
We'll also talk into the microphones as well, and that might help as well. So,
And maybe if I can't hear any questions coming from the board, then you can repeat.
certainly, I will do that. So thank you. We're very excited this evening to have a curriculum conversation around literacy and our literacy study and curriculum, kindergarten through 5th grade out our elementary buildings. We are also joined by Principal Peggy McInerney and Principal David Max. I want to thank them for being here tonight. I convened the literacy study this year, and I'll talk a little bit about that rationale in a moment, but I do want to thank all of the members of the literacy study. We have an amazing group of teachers, administrators, and parents who have joined that study. We also have 2 board members who are part of that, and I do want to thank Lara Stengel and Melissa Jacobs for serving on the literacy study this year. We have had 2 meetings to date with the literacy study. We have 3 more scheduled throughout the year, and we also have some public meetings as well. We had our principal's coffee on November 29th. That's available on our website for viewing from our parents. And we also employed 2 amazing consultants, one of whom is with us tonight, Kay Stahl, Dr. Catherine Stahl. So in a moment, I'll have Kay introduce herself, and you will see why we hired her. She's an amazing educator, formerly a teacher and a researcher. And her knowledge is incredible, and we're honored to have her with us to guide us through some really deep learning, as well as Dr. Molly Ness, who is trying to log in. She is at a conference this evening and out of town, and she's having trouble getting on the Wi-Fi, so she may pop on later as well. Thank everybody for the study, and thank Lara and Melissa for your time. It's a lot of time, and we appreciate that. Before the pandemic hit in 2018 and 19, we started to review our literacy curriculum K-5. We frequently review our curricular programs, and I have a process for studying our curriculum, a several-phase process that we go through in order to make sure we're continually improving our curriculum. We want to make sure we're always reflecting on what's working for our students in the district. Are all of our students achieving the way we want them to? And if not, what type of curricular or instructional changes should we make? We also want to make sure that we are keeping up with the current research and literature in all of the academic fields. That led us to decide when the pandemic hit, we still worked on our literacy curriculum, and we still employed it the best we could during the pandemic, and we did an amazing job at that, and I want to thank our teachers for that as well. But we are picking back up on literacy. Literacy has been in the press a lot in the last 6 months to a year. So what we like to do in Byram Hills is slow down and take our time and study deeply and make decisions that are very deliberate and that make decisions that meet the needs of our students and that align with the best practices. So when we are thinking about curriculum, there are 3 very simple principles we take. The first is we want our curriculum to be coherent and well articulated. What that means is we think about the students traveling through our school system from kindergarten to first grade, the second through graduating from Byram Hills High School. We want to make sure that curriculum makes sense to our students, because we know that students have to build upon prior knowledge and prior common language to learn the best that they can. That way we're really being very deliberate about our curriculum. The second is we want to make sure we're aligned to national and state standards. The reason for that is we want to make sure we're hitting on the most important knowledge that the standards committees feel is essential for our students' learning. And finally, we want to make sure that our curriculum is grounded in best practices and research. So given all those things, we're doing that through our literacy study right now. And our literacy study is to take time to make sure we're taking into account the best practices and the latest and current research and how students learn to read and write. So that's my introduction. We'll get into the details of that. Peggy and Dave and I have been talking about literacy over the last couple of days, and we really geek out when we get to this, and Kay will appreciate that. I want the board to feel free to jump in. Any questions you have about literacy, we could go on for hours talking. Whenever we talk, we think, wow, we could just do this for hours and hours. So please feel free to jump in and interrupt me. And I want this to be a conversation. We have our principals, we have an expert researcher here in the field of literacy. So with that in mind,
Tim, I appreciate the clarifying statements that you make, because since this whole science of reading and articles in the New York Times about certain models and debunking certain models and saying they don't work, it almost seems like there's a three-alarm fire happening in the world of reading right now. So everyone is saying, oh my gosh, well, what is everyone going to do? And that's not the case. Like, the case is, in Byram Hills, we want to look at what we do. We want to take this opportunity when this research is in abundance and look at the research and then look back at what we're doing as a district and say, are we either validated in what we're doing? Do we want to tweak what we're doing? Is there something new we want to learn? And that is being a part of a learning environment. It's not running and rushing to a fire. We don't have a fire. We have kids who are scoring in the top 10% in New York State on their ELA exams, right? I mean, that just recently came out. Our kids do very well on their Regents exams. It's not that we are looking at this as a colossal problem, but we understand that this is something that you always need to study. And this isn't a study that's going to happen now and then end. It's going to be just like math with investigations, the studying and the restudying and the changing pathways in math. You know, we're constantly needing to evolve that. You can't just take on a philosophy or a program when it comes to anything in education and run with it for 20 years. So that is the bulk of the work that you're doing, and I commend you and I commend our elementary principals for bringing this to the forefront and being brave enough to say, we're not only going to study this, we want to bring others along with us. And then after we all learn together, we'll see what we've gleaned from that and bring it back and look at what we're doing. So
Great.
I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. And I don't want the misconception out there, because I did have a parent who I really love came up to me and said, well, what are you going to do about the literacy problem? And it was like, what do you mean? Well, you know, there's a literacy study because of the problem. And I said, well, what is the problem? And the parent said, is there a problem? So this is, it becomes inflamed because of what's in the paper and what people are finding out works and doesn't work now. And if we're not going to actively engage in learning about all of that, then our children are not getting best served. So.
And I'll just thank you for that, Jen. And I'll just want to show quickly on the screen, which is our curriculum review cycle, which has 4 phases. And there's a study and plan phase, an implementation phase, an evaluate and reflect, and a revise and refine. I won't go through the details, and I've shared this with the board in the past, and we constantly go through these phases with all of our curricular initiatives on a regular basis. So every year I update a chart where we're looking at our different curricular programs, and they fall under these various phases. There's no timeline to this. A study could last 6 months or it could last 2 years. I once studied elementary math programs for 2 years before we made a decision. So we take our time because we want to make sure we understand the best to make the best decisions for our students. So thank you with that. So Kay, I'll turn to you now. And first, let me have you introduce yourself, and could you please just give us a little bit of a synopsis of your background?
Okay, sure. I came late to academia. I had taught in elementary and middle schools for 27 years. Then I got my doctorate in 2003 at the University of Georgia. We were living in Athens, my husband and I, so then he was recruited by the University of Illinois, so I went there, and that's where I really started. I had taught some at Clemson, some elementary methods classes at Clemson, and then we moved to Illinois, so I was at the University of Illinois, and then after my husband passed away, I applied for a position at New York University, and that position, I taught in the literacy education program, and so I taught graduate courses for students who were in the literacy specialist program. I also taught the occasional undergraduate course, but primarily that literacy specialist course, and I founded and directed a reading clinic for the students who had reading difficulties in our community. And also for 10 years, I also worked on the state RTI MTSS consortium. The first 5 years, that first generation of the program, was with 14 pilot elementary schools, and the second 5 years were with 14 demonstration middle schools. So that was a very interesting process, and we did it quite differently, both from one generation to the next. But it was a very interesting process, and again, something that I'm sure you'll be exploring as part of this study.
Thank you. And Kay has written lots of articles and some books, which I've had the pleasure of reading some of those when I met Kay probably last May or June when I first reached out to you after reading a few articles. So very prolific writer as well, and there's a lot of good information that she's been sharing with us. So thank you for that. So Kay, we've been using the term literacy. Can you just sort of help us understand? That's a big umbrella term. So when we say literacy, can you help us understand what that means? What are the different buckets underneath that?
Sure. Overall, literacy means just any kind of knowledge in a specific area. But for our purposes, we typically are talking about what we used to consider, say, the English language arts, which includes reading, writing, speaking, listening. And it doesn't matter. Today, we also include whether things are print sources or whether things are electronic sources. So that has really opened another area that we need to be considerate of, is how our children and our older students are functioning within the new technologies.
Right, we've been integrating some of those skills into it's been discussions we've been having internally, particularly at the secondary level. And our English chairperson, Mr. Smith, has been working on that as well. And a lot of what's been written about in the press recently has been talking about the science of reading. So can you help us understand that a little bit? I was going to ask what do they mean by that, but I don't know what they mean. But can you help us understand what the science of reading is that usually they're referring to in the press? And then we'll sort of grapple with that a little bit.
Sure. I think in the past, historically, we have done some literacy research, but many of us have worked in silos. So you have a body of psychology research that knows some aspects of reading instruction and literacy instruction, and then you have neurology, which also knows how the brain works, and they have another body of research. And then we have special education, who views their students' needs in one way. Then we have the field of literacy, we have speech and language, and all of these areas, all these disciplines of research have primarily operated in silos with very little communication among each other, attending their own separate conferences. They also, each of us have our own journals, our own handbooks of expertise, And so what the science of reading does is really is stating that we need to, when we're teaching reading and talking about how to teach reading and how children learn reading and what those influences are and what works, we need to look at all of those areas of research, not just any single one. And this is not just a trend. It is not, something that is a pendulum swing over in the opposite direction, even though it may feel like that. But what we want to do through studies like this is to really make sure that we don't fall into perhaps the habit or what is often happens when we have something happen like this, where we're beginning to look at some different research and look at things in a different way in a field. We want to make sure that we don't just pick and choose the particular pieces that we like, or we don't want to just pick and choose the particular aspects that might be easiest to implement and easiest to measure. We want to make sure that we are really taking a careful look and incorporating all of these areas, and that's really what the science of reading is that we're really being inclusive of all the information and all the research that is coming out in each of those areas. And we have new research coming out in these journals every single month. So there is a lot of information that we can incorporate to make our reading instruction most effective.
And so when you say that, so it's drawing on a lot of things, and the research is still happening. The National Reading Panel report came out, what was it, about 20 some years ago? 20 years ago?
Yeah, it was 2000. It was the year 2000.
Right. So has there been additional research that has, I guess, confirmed that research? And has there been any contradictory research in the last 5 years, 10 years? Or is it all pretty much confirming that original 2000 report?
Yeah, because that was, because it looked at, it was such a large meta-analysis, that what we have found out since then, for the most part, has not contradicted it, but it has confirmed and expanded what we learned then, as with all, we've just added more to that knowledge bank. And in fact, with our professional journals, new journals are coming out every single month. And so that there's new information expanding what we know. And sometimes different clusters of literacy, like I know there's actually a journal that puts out what's hot and what's not in 2022. So we go through periods when there's more research in one thing or the other. So for example, in 2013, I think it was 2013, the IES, a federal research grant administrator, allocated 5 universities and some funds to investigate comprehension instruction from preschool through high school. And so after 5 years of those funds, 235 studies had been done. And so in 2020, we had a summary of all those studies come out, reaping the rewards of the IES grant studies, and which is a new font of research about how best to teach comprehension. And that has greatly expanded, for example, what any one individual study has done, and also it's gone well beyond what the National Reading Panel. And that's very typical. I would say in the last 10 years, there's probably been less information on phonics because, I think we have learned some things about phonics, but certain aspects of it, like we've learned a lot more about letter learning. We've learned a lot more about how fluency and that orthographic mapping occurs so that we can have children reading more fluently. So we have pockets of new knowledge.
That's very helpful. So you've mentioned the term phonics. Can you just, for a moment, briefly help us understand what phonics means? When you refer to that, what are you talking about?
When I talk about phonics, I am talking about letter-sound correspondences. And primarily, those, for phonics, the basic letter-sound correspondences are for single letter or letter clusters to sounds. It's also for the most common single syllable patterns, like those short vowel patterns that have a vowel and a consonant, or long vowel patterns, single syllable long patterns that have a vowel, consonant, and a silent E, or two vowels, or most of those single syllable patterns tend to fall into what we consider phonics. When we get into multisyllabic words, it gets a little more complicated. And also what happens is most of your commercial programs, and this is one thing that in your study I think you want to really take a look at. And you know, I loved what you said about having a coherent, well-articulated program K through 12. And I think when we think of phonics and most commercial phonics programs, you're going to find phonics programs that come out that are geared to K through 2, all right, or pre-K through 2. And they will deal with primarily those single syllable patterns. They might talk a little bit about chunking and where to use syllabicate a word, but I think what schools typically do is any kind of word study, aside from that general knowledge about how to syllabicate a word or divide it into syllables, there's not really much work being done in a lot of elementary schools in grades 3 through 4 and 5 on the nuances of those syllable junctures. It's a missing piece. Also, what tends to be missing that you all want to look at is how you teach. You know, then we move into from patterns to morphology, and that means prefixes, suffixes, and Greek and Latin roots. The parts of words that also contribute to vocabulary development and meaning development. And so we want to make sure that that also is done in a systematic way. And what too often happens in those grades is that the nuances of syllabication aren't taught at all. And as a result, that spills over into your writing, because then you have kids for words like words that end in those unaccented syllables that they all sound in, like captain, curtain, button. They all have the same sound at the end, but they all have a very different spelling. And so those things are not taught. The other thing in terms of the vocabulary and Greek and Latin derivatives, it seems like what I've seen most frequently in the schools I've worked with is teachers might teach those common ones. Maybe they're on the list for the New York State, they're going to be on the test this year, or they're part of a reading program that you have. But then when we get into the Greek and Latin derivatives, it's very randomly done. And what we end up having done is the teachers pick which ones they want to teach or that are relevant to their topic. And we have kids learning the same ones year after year, and several of them are never taught. So you want to really think about your word study program also as like a K-8 continuum, that you want to pay attention to those syllable junctures and also the morphology.
You just gave me a lot of homework, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. I love it. And there's a lot of things you just said that I want to ask follow-ups. I want to get to Peggy and Dave in a second, and the board, please jump in.
That's more than you wanted to know.
I could just do this all.
We have to find out if we already do that.
Right. We do a lot. I know we use, I'm going to ask you some direct questions. We use a phonics program called Foundations in kindergarten through 3rd grade. So you've talked about explicit and systematic. We hear that when we hear phonics, that it should be systematic and explicit. Can you explain what those two terms mean? And then do you believe, in your professional opinion, Foundations is a good program for us to use kindergarten through 3rd grade?
Absolutely. I'll start with the last question first. Absolutely. And if you already, most of the phonics programs, especially something with the structure and also that has all these parts and that has a reputation, it's as good as any phonics program and better than several. But the main thing is that, so I would continue, especially since you already have some machinery in place, since you already have some teachers using it. then you want to continue. You don't want to change gears, for something that's just the same and have to start over again. So I would stick with the foundations.
Okay, thank you.
And then in terms of explicit and systematic, the systematic means that, there is a scope and sequence, all right? It's, we start with, it's a developmental sequence. It's that, we start with hearing sounds and words and distinguishing the sounds, and then we learn the consonant sounds and how to form the letters, and we learn, about the vowels and with those single syllables and with short vowels, and then we go to consonant blend. So there's a scope and sequence, a progression that is based on research about how reading develops.
Okay.
Okay? It's not haphazard. It's not, we're going to do this. Some reading programs, I won't mention any names, we all know what they are. Some reading programs have done it when I see a child misspelling a word, then I'm going to put those words and make that on their spelling list. We don't want to do that. We want to have a systematic program to make sure everything is covered. And direct means that you're explicitly teaching. It means you are actually explicitly teaching in a very direct way, not a veiled way, not a guessing game way. That you are teaching kids how to hear the sounds, what the sounds sound like, and also as a universal educational practice, you want to teach them how to feel it in their mouths. So it has universality incorporated in this. Then you also want to teach them how to read the words that have those patterns and how those patterns are read. You want to teach them how to write when they're talking about long vowels. The spelling should be done at the same time. You don't want a separate spelling program from the phonics program. It should all be done together because it's a reciprocal process. It builds on each other. And again, in terms of universal practices, we want to make sure that children have multiple pathways for learning this information. That's how the most effective learning takes place, if we're doing it. And then even in terms of not only spelling the words, but forming the letters correctly in manuscript. And then the last two steps that are often forgotten, and often poor teachers don't have enough time, and often and this is something that as a curricular problem, I won't say a problem, it's a curricular challenge, is that they don't build in, they just go week 1, week 2, week 3, and they go to a new skill every week. They do not build in time for the two most essential practices, the two most essential steps in explicit instruction. Building for automaticity. Kids have got to be, the whole point of phonics instruction is so that kids have automatic word recognition, so that reading is seamless and not cumbersome, and it's not having to be disrupting the comprehension process.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, you want to make sure that there is built into your program, which you may have to build it in, is automaticity practice, whether it's drills, whether it's timed games, other ways to incorporate automaticity. And the other thing, the fifth thing that must be included in explicit systematic instruction is transfer. Because we don't want the kids to just learn the 10 words on the list. We want them to transfer this when they're doing their writing workshop. We want this to transfer this when they're reading a novel word that has a common pattern. And so that also has to be built in, especially, and this is important, not so much with the short vowels, but more when you get to the long vowels, because there is no rule for spelling those long vowels. It might be A-I or A silent E, we don't know. It relies on visual memory. It relies on them seeing those words. So therefore, when we get to long vowels, when we get to R-controlled vowels, and when we get to those unaccented syllables, and here we go with our 3rd and 4th graders, that we have to have transfer opportunities with lots of games and distributed practice. I always say that if we have a lesson 1 week those 4 categories of words, we need to have 4 weeks of follow-up distributed practice, whether it's in a station, wherever you put it, but sometime in like some kind of center or station, it needs to be followed up with. Otherwise, they will only learn the 10 words you taught.
Thank you. This is what happens when I talk to Kay. She mentioned so many things that I then want to dive deeper into. I'm going to go to Peggy and Dave for a moment to follow up on that point. Kay started talking about the instructional pedagogy in the classroom with how we follow up and the small group instruction. So I'm wondering if Peggy and Dave, you can each walk us through an example of what a classroom might look like. Kay's talking about the phonics piece, and then we'll get to the bigger sort of umbrella of literacy in general. But so in a sample classroom, what might the instruction look like? And Kay's talking about, I'm hearing her talk about responsiveness to students. We can't just do a week of instruction in phonics, then move on to the next thing and not be really being responsive to the transfer automaticity for students. So how does that all work in a classroom? What might a literacy block look like, Peggy?
So thank you, Kay. I'm going to talk primary, and Kay, a lot of what you said I see in our classrooms. Let me just share with you how we break out a literacy block. We have our direct explicit instruction, whether it's in a skills group or a guided reading group, depending on the needs of the learners in front of us. If they're non-readers, they're in a skills group. If they're readers, they're in a guided reading group or in a skills group, depending on the need. We have centers that happen while our teachers are in a guided reading or skills group, and those centers really are an application of learning in terms of what happened in the direct instruction of the skills group or the guided reading group. So there's a lot of application of learning in the different literacy centers throughout the room. Those centers are designed for children to do them independently and practice what was just directly taught to them. Those centers can live for up to 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. It really depends on the data that is being collected in the student work and how the teacher knows to transfer new centers, new tasks into those centers. We also have other centers where we are doing the transfer of knowledge to see if our children can, not only can they apply what was taught to them, but now they're transferring what was taught to them in other disciplines. If they are able to apply that in a response to literature, through something that we're learning in social studies or science or math in those centers. So we have a lot of integrated curriculum in our literacy block, and our teachers are designing direct lessons that are tailored to the needs of the children in front of them, whether they're advanced learners, on grade level learners, or learners who need a little more support. And the way the independent tasks run is really either application of learning or transfer of learning.
I just want to add one thing to that. With some of that station work that Peggy and Kay are talking about, what's really amazing when the teacher is with a small group working on guided instruction, other children may be working with a different level of instruction based on what they're doing independently. So there's the instruction that's happening and what can they handle independently. And this is all happening, then some kids over here are working on cursive within Foundations, because Foundations is much more than phonics. So all these distant stations can be going on based on that data that Peggy had mentioned.
Thanks, Dave. I want to add one thing to what you just said. So I was really talking about when we get into the time within the literacy block where we're really focused on center work or group work. But there's also a time that what happens in the literacy block before that, we will do whole group instruction, and depending on the need of that day's lesson, whether it's a read aloud. Read alouds are often done with content that is either above grade level or below grade level, depending on the purpose. And we also do our phonics instruction whole class. And I agree with Kay, the way Foundations is set up, not only does it support all children learning the basic structures of how our language develops, but for our advanced learners, it also gives them the tools that they need to start to really understand linguistics. And it really is the segue into that intermediate level of elementary learning where you're learning about prefixes, suffixes, prepositions, grammar, all of that kind of stuff that really feeds right through our Foundations whole class instruction.
Great, thank you. Yes, Scott.
One question.
If you could talk into the mic so Kay can hear you as well.
Okay, can you hear me? Actually?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Scott. So Thanks for being with us tonight. One of the questions just about the body of research that exists, I'm sure a lot of these studies are quite intricate, but when you apply, I guess, the findings of the studies in terms of the optimal way to teach reading to a classroom where you are going to have a very diverse set of learners, probably on two different planes, right? You're going to have diversity just the way people learn generally. I mean, some people are just learn differently than others. And then secondly, you're going to have kids at different levels in the same class. And if it's a gen ed class, let's say in the 3rd or 4th grade, you could have kids reading maybe at the middle school level, you could have kids that are struggling at maybe behind level. And so is the research universal in terms of saying that all kids, regardless of the style of learning and the level that they're at, you need to learn with this methodology? Or is there tremendous nuance, depending on the level of the reading and the style of learning?
I think that's a great question. I think that for the most part, what we want to know is through assessment, we want to know where our children are, all right? And that we want to provide opportunities in class where for some of those skills that are learned in a linear way, like phonics, we want to make sure that we can address those needs explicitly. Like if they still don't know short vowels, we want to teach them the short vowels. We don't want to go zoom on in our foundation 2nd grade program because they're in 2nd grade. We want to make sure that those children that we make accommodation for them. In something like comprehension and in our general reading, like Peggy was talking about with like the read aloud and then how we integrate that with content, we want to have something called, we still want to have that, it's very important to have that communal experience. And then what you can do is provide some differentiation. You don't have to necessarily, you can have the same goals for the child and they're participating in the same content, but the way you're getting there and the accommodation that you provide may be somewhat different for each child. And you can do that in several ways. You can do that by giving them different materials. You can do that by giving them a different way to express themselves. You can do that by giving them a menu of choices to provide that knowledge. You can make difficult text accessible through audio books and audio materials. So, especially if your goal is comprehension. So there are many ways that you can still employ the research, for say comprehension, but have it be implemented in ways that accommodate the individual's needs. Does that make sense?
Yep, no, it does.
And I want to come back to comprehension. So sometimes when we read about phonics, you hear phonics first, that you've got to just focus on phonics only, or phonics first. Does comprehension come later, or do you start integrating comprehension and fluency and vocabulary while kids are still beginning to learn how to read, sort of our emergent readers? How does all that tie together, Kay?
I would say comprehension comes first.
Okay.
Because, children need the oral language and the vocabulary, and they need the world experiences. So, now of course, I'm a comprehension gal. So, I would say that comprehension comes first. And the other thing is, because phonics is so linear, if you do a darn good job of being explicit with phonics, everybody can learn it. It's a constrained skill, so it may take one kid a bit longer to learn it than others, but there's not going to be anybody in 6th grade who, for the most part, doesn't know the short vowels. For the most part, all kids know that by that grade level. All right? Things like long vowels are going to be a little trickier. Kids, a lot of adults with reading disability and dyslexia, that's where their hurdle was those long vowels. But if you're doing a really great job of teaching kids and differentiating when they're young, you're not going to have the challenge with that. And so you really want to give a good 30 in kindergarten, 1st grade. If kindergarten, say 30 minutes of phonics instruction and phonics and phonological awareness. In 1st grade, it may be as much as 45, all right? And that, for first graders, is when there's going to be the most phonics instruction. But you've got to do that comprehension instruction from preschool on up. You know, through reading aloud, through having kids retell stories, through videos. The videos are a wonderful way because it doesn't have, the decoding is not interfering in it. And you can really get to the heart of the comprehension. So you want to really start having kids, even with natural language, you know, responding to you in a narrative format, talking about from beginning to end what they did when they went and stayed with their grandmother last night. Or what plans do we have when, you know, we're going to fix our Thanksgiving feast, or reviewing what we did for Thanksgiving. So those kinds of narrative stories of experiential are important. And then when reading to kids, and even in language, having kids talk about things that are not in the here and now, because those are essential competencies for comprehension. And so we do know that in terms of inference, we know that kids as young as 3 and 4 years old have similar inference skills to older children, that they can make the inference. They may need to be prompted by a parent or a caregiver may need to ask them questions. But comprehension instruction, as you all know, and those of you as teachers and principals, know that comprehension is the rocket science of reading instruction. And it requires actually more time because it's more complex. And so you really don't want to shortchange your time with comprehension. There are only so many hours of the day. So as we begin to get in 2nd and 3rd grade, and definitely by 4th and 5th, you want to do what I'm sure Dave and Peggy even mentioned it, that you really want to, by 2nd grade, begin integrating and making that intersection between content instruction and your comprehension instruction seamless.
Can you expand on that a little more, what you mean by that? And Peggy could jump in, or Dave could jump in as well. Peggy, do you want to?
Okay, I just want to add to what you're talking about and to Scott's question. The way our elementary teachers are tasked with teaching children, they have to come in through concrete, tactile, and pictorial ways. But they also have to address learners who are more linear thinkers or more abstract thinkers. The way we have set up our curriculum in my time here in Byron Hills is really everything is anchored through our language development, and we are developing comprehension from the moment they enter kindergarten as they arrive in the building to when they dismiss in the building. It's really all about comprehension and helping them understand. But if we looked at our investigations math program, it's a language-based program. In order for our children to be successful at any of the games or any of the tasks in the investigations program, they have to comprehend it. And the way that program is designed is for our concrete or pictorial learners to start to understand how our abstract thinkers are solving, and our abstract thinkers to start to make connections to linear thinking or concrete thinking, so that they develop that flexibility in thinking at the age of 5. So I see our math curriculum as one great example of developing our language from the youngest ages in our district.
Thank you. So I want to talk about, I want to have Peggy and Dave walk us through our curriculum, sort of our programs that we use and the interventions we use. And then I want to talk about, have Kay sort of respond to what we're doing, and also be looking at our interventions and how we help students who might be struggling along the way. And so I want to talk about that for a moment. So I'm going to just show something. This is a chart of our initiatives and focus right now. So first, looking at our core curriculum, we talked a lot about foundations already, is our phonics program, which we learn includes a lot more than just phonics, but is our key explicit and systematic program. We're using Wonders right now, which we did adopt during the pandemic. Let me just give a little background on our literacy curriculum. We developed our literary curriculum with our teachers probably about 20 years ago, around that ballpark, around 2000 and so. We had developed a local literacy curriculum with our faculty. And then in 2011, when the new standards came out, we took a look at that again and revised our program to meet the new standards. We learned a lot about aligning curriculum to standards. And now we're looking at it again. And it was during the pandemic that we realized we didn't have electronic tools because it was all done in person. And so we didn't know what the year 2020, 2021 was going to be like. So over that summer, we adopted Wonders because it had a strong digital component that could be electronic if we had to go virtual, and for our students who were at home during that time and during, when kids had to be quarantined, we had materials for them. But it's also a pretty decent program. It's highly rated on Ed Reports as being aligned to standards. So we've been using that right now just because it's consistent, as well as bringing in our local curriculum to align with it as well. So that's our Wonders curriculum. Peggy, if you could just talk about Wonders and WonderWorks a little bit, and then I'll have Dave talk about some of our other pieces. Or Dave's going to talk about that, and then Peggy.
Is this on?
Okay.
I'm sorry. So I'll talk a little bit about the curriculum. Wonders, it is aligned to standards, which is a great thing. So right now, Wonders is our main curriculum, kindergarten through 5th grade for literacy. There's a lot of advantages about this. I think we spoke a little bit about it back in October too, but there's a tremendous amount of resources that come with it. There's the anthology, a textbook, there's the student workbook, as Tim mentioned, the online resources. I was in a class the other day, there was stations going on. There was a few advanced kids that were doing Wonders games because they need to work on grammar. Kids could comprehend. And I asked the teacher, well, what are you doing? They were actually doing grammar games based within Wonders, but it was actually about something that related to history. So we talk about transfer, it was related to social studies. So those two interdisciplinary things were related, which was really good. I think another really good aspect of Wonders is WonderWorks. I think one thing we continuously looked at with curriculum is if a child is receiving some kind of special education services, how does that curriculum relate to our general education curriculum? And what happens if a child has to go between the two? Maybe the child's doing really well, is going to exit special education. How do they then now enter a general education class where maybe they were speaking a different language, so to speak? So WonderWorks is directly aligned with Wonders, so we can now have kids that could go to mathematics for special education and go to language arts and general education. So we gave a little more flexibility, really meeting the needs of the kids based on where they're at and the data they were choosing. Foundations we spoke a lot about, so I won't talk any more about that. Do you want to talk about interventions? Here's Peggy.
So just following up from Dave, foundations, when we start to, when our data suggests that a child might need some kind of support, we like to really support children so that we don't have to put children into classifications that they don't need to be in. So we have a very robust local option program, which is part of our MTSS plan. If a child, if the data is suggesting that a child needs an intervention in reading, we start with a double dose of foundations in kindergarten and 1st grade. We have found since 2008 that using that double dose, it's actually what the child needs developmentally. They just need a little more time to get a pre-teach or reteach or a different approach to that foundations lesson. As our children progress and they go into 2nd grade, if they're in a Tier 2 support program, which looks like 90 minutes a week in a small group, pull out 2 times 45, 3 times 30, or however it works on the child's schedule, if the foundations program's not working, then we move into another curriculum at that intervention level. We move into PAF. The reason it's purposely done, when children are not responding, we give that a certain amount of time, and then we recognize that we might need a different approach because for that child, that young learner, it's not working. So we go into PAF. And then the child will stay in the PAF program. And now, let me just talk about programs. If we're in a Tier 2 and the child is making progress, they go back into the classroom as a Tier 1, and they go back and they're not going to need any more services. If the child is not making progress in that Tier 2, we move them into a Tier 3, and we do that for about 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the need for the child. That time in Tier 3 is one-on-one, it's an extra 30 minutes. It allows us to really decide, are we looking at a disability here, or are we looking at a child who needs just a little more interventions, and we figured out the adaptation to bring them back into a Tier 2 or back into the classroom, and often that little tweak is what the child needed. tier 2, the one thing I also wanted to add is they're liked groups. We don't put tier 2s together of children who are decoding and children who are comprehending. We are putting decoding children on a grade level in their own small group so that we can do very clear research-based interventions for what that group of learners needs. And then as we, yes, ma'am.
Just to follow up, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Are you saying that a child could potentially be in third grade before there's testing, an identification of an actual disability, or is that potentially identified way before?
Absolutely not. So, and of course, we would be testing any child for, you're talking if they were to need an IEP?
Potentially.
We would test them even before they come into kindergarten if that is what the evidence is showing us, either from preschool or kindergarten or, parent request. We are collecting data and we are doing progress monitoring on children first in the classroom setting, constantly. From the very first day of school, we begin with screenings for literacy. And we are doing formative assessments all the time to understand, are our children meeting the benchmarks that they need to meet in September, October, November. If a child goes into tier 2, we are progress monitoring and we are doing formative assessments in that tier 2 intervention to see that they are making progress in the targeted goals for that intervention. So our children are constantly being assessed. They don't feel like they're being assessed. We're not saying you're taking a test, but it's just part of our system that children are getting local assessments done on the lessons that they're given, whether they're in a tier 2 or a tier 3 or in the classroom.
So they could potentially move through the tiers in a much shorter time frame than...
If a child's not making progress, then that's a good question. So if a child is failing to respond in the tiers, then that's a conversation that we bring to a team and we talk about that. It's been 4 weeks of this data, the child's not making any progress, we want to move forward with a conversation to a CSE referral. And that's a parent, the parent is part of that team at that time.
And if they are making progress, then we take them out of that service. And we have instructional support teams in our building which analyze the data on kids and have conversations about the children. Right?
It's a very fluid process.
And Peggy's speaking to, just for our public who might not know some of the language, Peggy mentioned MTSS, which is multi-tiered system of support. I'm showing part of our plan on the screen now, which is we talk about levels of tiers. Dave, could you just walk us through the tiers quickly and what they mean? Tier
Yes.
1, 2, 3.
Yes, and in all the buildings, we have these teams that exist that can analyze the data for students, if students need more support. So the tiers, it's funny, 10, 12, 15 years ago, it was kind of like 3 tiers, now it's turned into 4 tiers. Tier 1 is really in the classroom, right? What are the teachers doing based on data and standards to meet the needs of the kids? And how do we differentiate based on what different kids need in the classroom? That's good tier 1 interventions. How are we progress monitoring, as Peggy mentioned, the progress a child's making? That's really tier 1. Tier 2, a couple different models. Let me give you a couple examples. Reading specialists, based on a child not meeting some progress in a certain area, could have a conversation with the reading specialist, and the reading specialist to start to push into that class while they're working on decoding to pull a small group, as Peggy mentioned, of kids that are pretty much on the same level to work on a very specific skill for 4 weeks. That's not working. Okay, then we're going to move on to tier 3, or even within the tier 2, depending on what we're looking at with the kid. Then maybe it's a pull-out service, right? So now the child is not being pulled from an academic period, but we're pulling from another period of the day where the child is now meeting with that reading teacher and working on something very specific, again, meeting the needs of whatever the data is showing us, decoding, and maybe we're doing PAF with the child, whatever it may be. Tier 3 can also be one-to-one instruction. Again, we're looking at how much time, we always set a time period. So hey, this child's gonna really get this explicit instruction in decoding for 4 to 6 weeks. We're gonna come back to team, discuss that data, see what the growth was, see what the progress was. And if there's not progress that's really what we're looking for, then we just continue to move up in tiers. Tier 4 is really a conversation at that point. Does this child have some kind of a disability where we need specially designed instruction by a special education teacher to meet the needs of this child?
Thanks, Dave. I want to go to Kay and circle back to her, and then I have one final thing I want to talk about, and if the board, again, jump in if you have any other questions. So, Kay, you heard us speak about our sort of core curriculum, and then Peggy talked about some of the intervention tools we have preventing academic failure, or PAF. We also use Just Words in 4th and 5th grade, Wilson Reading System in 4th and 5th grade if we need to provide Tier 2 or Tier 3 interventions. As you hear those things, could you talk about, we're pulling from these different programs. I guess my big question is, or simple question is that okay? Or is there one way we should be doing it? You know, we're using these different programs to meet different needs at different times for kids and then responding accordingly. Yeah, I know you have a lot of knowledge about a response to intervention approach. Is there something we should be thinking about in our current model? Oops, I think.
Peggy and Dave, as both Peggy and Dave pointed out, that if you're working with one thing and it's not working for a child, you've got to go to something else. And so, I mean, I think you want to have multiple tools in your toolbox. And I think that, you know, it seems like it's very systematized. So, I mean, I think that's very good. Everybody knows what's what. I guess the only thing I was still unclear, I was unclear on is how is it that, what is the process for getting a student into Tier 2?
Kay, you just froze on us. Getting a little bit of weak signal from Kay, but I think I heard part of your question, Kay. Yeah. I think I'll go to Peggy and Dave to talk about this. I think your question is around the process that we use, which we didn't clarify. And if you get unstuck, Kay, that'll be good. We'll see what happens to the Wi-Fi there. Let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry. So, Dave, could you talk about that a bit? What is our process? We do have a pretty thorough, consistent process, kindergarten through 8th grade. Really, we use a similar process.
Yeah.
And I think I heard Kay also talking about the criteria.
Yeah, great question, Kay. So we do. We have very specific groups of professionals that meet in the building to discuss student data. So if a teacher is not, has a child that's not progressing, they come to team, and we have a conversation based on data. Who sits on that team? The principal, the assistant principal, and then it really becomes, what is the need, right? We can go anywhere from it's a student wellness need to it's a literacy need to a math need. If it's a literacy need, our reading specialist would be there. A special education teacher sits on there. Usually our speech pathologist sits on there. Maybe OT/PT needs to sit on there. So we have all these professionals that will come and sit, and we look at the student data. The teacher will present the kind of where they're at in the school year with the child's progress, and then we make a decision. And we really have, it's a group conversation about, well, have you tried this in the classroom, right? Sometimes we leave team and it's still a Tier 1 intervention because now the teacher has kind of a new idea they want to try for 4 weeks. Or, well, this kid, based on some historical data, this was also an issue last year, right? And we tried A, B, and C. It still seems to be an issue. It really now needs to be a pullout. So, and I think that one of the most important things is those timelines are always set. When are we revisiting this to discuss this child again? See if it's working. Great, it's working. Do we need more time of that intervention? Is this child good? Get him back down to Tier 1, or do we need to progress? Does that answer your question, Kay?
Yeah. And I think it's really terrific that I'm hearing lots of fluidity in your movement between the tiers, which I think is really important. I mean, we don't want kids, and what happens in many schools is once a child is in Tier 2 or Tier 3, they're stuck there. So I'm hearing that fluidity of constant progress monitoring to make sure children are where they need to be and yet getting the help they need to receive.
Great, thanks.
Hey, just one other question just about the research. We know that devices, iPhones, iPads, computers, there's a linkage between usage and potential mental health issues in some kids, especially teens, right? With reading, is there any impact that researchers have found from just kids using devices? Like, for example, is it more difficult now for the average child in 7th grade to read a 250-page book than it was 20 years ago when we were, because we've all been so accustomed to bite-sized information on our devices, even as adults. So any sort of words of wisdom about how you can teach through that and make sure that kids are able to grasp the more complex comprehension challenges that they're going to have when they go into middle school and high school?
I think there is a lot of good research out on that, but there's a researcher, a woman named Julie Quarro, who has done excellent research on, just like we have a scope and sequence with some of the more traditional print reading skills, she has written and done a lot of research on what is that development, for children's technology use, and also what are the ways. So for example, we know that it doesn't matter if you're reading a narrative text, it's probably just as effective to read an electronic book as it is to read a print book. Even for adolescents and young children, maybe not little kids, but the middle school and high school kids. However, if we're reading informational text, we probably want to be in a print textbook.
Oh, that's interesting. So, thank you. And I guess a related note, Scott, this came up at our last literacy study meeting, which was interesting, about handwriting. So, handwriting and a similar, and specifically cursive handwriting. So, Kay, what's your thought and what's the research saying about, I write a lot less by hand now and type, and that's been good for me in terms of my writing. But as young learners, is that handwriting still important? And then what's the role of cursive? Is there any writing research on cursive?
I think the time is well invested in spending time with teaching kids manuscript letters, how to form the letters properly, which ones are large, which ones are small, and drawing their attention to that, which ones have common strokes. There's a lot of value in spending your time that way. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the research is with the cursive writing, but according to my perception is that by the time kids get to 3rd grade, there's only so many hours in the day. And so perhaps if you're going to teach cursive handwriting, we don't want it to be like it was back when I grew up, where you had to make the letters just exactly the right way, and you spent hours, and 15 minutes every day practicing it. I don't really think, with as much as kids have to learn today, and the schedules as tight as they are, I don't think we want to invest. This is just me. I don't know what the research is. I don't think it's worth taking a lot of academic time to teach that manuscript to such a precise manner that it used to be taught, say, 30 years ago. Because I think that, the comprehension, the use of technology, all of the things that you all mentioned today put vast pressures on our time. And I don't think that the payoff, especially with our use of computers, because so many kids are going to be using, about the only thing I would use is my signature. And anybody can just connect those letters. So, but we want kids to be able to use technology. That's the other thing. And most of us are going to be using computers. That legibility is, we want it to be legible, but we don't want to spend enough time on having it form this, the beautiful handwriting that our grandparents used to take pride in.
Right. Thank you for that. So I just want to consult with our board president for a moment. We've been going an hour strong here. I could go another hour, but I don't think that the board wants to do that.
I have to send my principals home because they have to be back at 7.
So
Okay.
I would just like to say, thank you to Tim and to Kay. Oh, my mic's not on, sorry.
They just speak into it, so.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, sorry. It is the Byram way that we do these deep dives, and we have a conversation, and we listen to the community, and we enlist experts when we need them, and really I have to thank Tim because he always does this, thoughtful and methodical research, and we enlist stakeholders and to come in and just have a conversation and learn, and it's a privilege, really, Kay. I've been at the literacy conversation, and I'm so happy. Melissa and I have enjoyed it so much. It's been incredible, and we're so blessed at Byram. That's our way, and we look at things. We always want to learn more. We always want to incorporate new research and technology. It comes to that. So I just thank you so much for your time, and and your just thoughtful presentations always, and your knowledge. And thank you, Tim. Thank you, Peggy and Dave, for coming tonight. And Jen, you want to?
Can I
Yes.
just ask one more?
Yeah, sure,
question
sure.
also? Thank you, Kay, for being here also. I've also really enjoyed being on the committee. Oh, I don't know if my mic is on. And how do I turn it on?
It might be on if you just.
I might just have to borrow yours. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. So thank you so much, Kay. And I think the literacy work that you've all been doing has been so incredibly important, and so happy to be a part of it. I'm just wondering, I guess this is really for everybody, what we are doing now and what we can continue to do to support our teachers in sort of taking all of this deep dive. And I know a lot of them are doing this already, probably all of them, but we're learning so much and there's so much new research. What can we do and what are we doing to make sure the teachers are kind of taking all of this and putting it out into their classrooms?
Right, so I'll first address it, Peggy, Dave, jump in if you want. So we all, again, looking at my curriculum review cycle, this is a year we're really going slow to study this deeply. At the end of this year, we may decide to continue doing this type of study. We will certainly synthesize what we've learned. And then with Peggy and Dave, I'll be working with them. As you know, we always invest a lot of time into summer curriculum work with our teachers and start planning next year's work. So I'll work with Peggy and Dave on what our next steps are with our faculty, which could include, we may bring Molly and Kay back in to work with us. I am really impressed with their knowledge. They've been helping us so much. I would love all of our teachers to have the opportunity to sit down and do some of this work together and really look closely at the different elements of our curriculum and guide us a little bit. What is working? What should we be rethinking? Is there anything new that we might want to be thinking about? So we will start planning that summer work, and then that will guide our work into next year. Also, immediately, we're actually bringing Kay in starting in December, a couple weeks. Kay's meeting with me, Peggy, Dave, and Kim Sapone, our Assistant Director of Special Services, to start really looking at our assessment system. So as we talked about those tier levels of support, we want to make sure, we want to reflect on all the assessments we're doing. We have local assessments aligned to Wonders, we have local assessments in Foundations, we have teacher-written assessments and observations, we have iReady, we have IRIs that we do, we have a bunch of assessments. Are some of them redundant? Should we be rethinking some of the assessments? So we're going to bring Kay in to study that for the rest of this year, because that's something immediate. And that came out in our literacy study as one of the first things we should do is have really good diagnostic assessments so we can see if kids are making progress, and if not, do an intervention. I think we have the interventions in place, it seems like. It's the assessments we want to make sure are working for us. So that's something that's going to happen immediately, and then the planning for the summer and next year.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
No, just one final statement of thanks to our teachers, because we know that as a community, we want to look at the research, and the research is only as good as our teachers, right? So we rely heavily on our K-5 teachers to look at this research and to, based upon the practices, I mean, we have teachers who are teaching for, it could be 2 years, it could be 35 years, and have the data of years of experience of kids behind them. And they need to be making the decisions with our administration about what direction, if any, the district is going to go. So, you know, it takes a lot for our teachers to recognize that, you know, this is not a district that is seeing a flaw in what they are doing. We are not going into their systems and their processes like forensic, you know, literacy specialists to tell them what they're doing right or doing wrong or to keep doing. We need their professionalism now more than ever, and I just want to express to the teachers how much I appreciate that professionalism, because without it and without the day-to-day knowledge of kids and how all of this is applicable, none of the research matters, right? So I appreciate that the buy-in from our teachers to look at this and to work and collaborate with the district. Many other places it doesn't happen like this. You'll find your Tim Kaltenecker and you'll find your Kay, and they will decide what everybody's going to do, and then they'll come in and they'll unveil it. And that's not the Byram Hills way, right? So we're just fortunate to work in a school community where we have educators who are consummate professionals and who will enjoy and benefit from learning about this and deciding what they think is best for our kids. And I have 100% confidence that our faculty will do that.
Great. So thanks to the board. I really appreciate your support and your time tonight. I want to just wave to Kay and say thank you. I'll be in touch. We'll talk soon, Kay. I can't thank you enough for your time. Thanks for staying late with us. I know it's past my bedtime. I don't know about yours, but thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, everyone, for all the work that you're doing.
Great. Thanks. We'll be in touch, Kay. Thanks for your help.
Tim, Peggy, and Dave, thank you so much.
Thank
That was
you.
great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Drive slowly, dear Susan.
Tim, do you need a minute, or can we move on to what about?
Just a minute.
Just a minute, okay, let's
Figure out how to get out of my screen.
Anyone need a 2-minute break? 2-minute break? 3-minute break?
Thank you.
Okay, we're back, everybody. Thank you. Let's go to 11, unfinished business, and it's review of policies.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Great. Gina's going to jump.
Sure. So just in terms of the second read, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that, thank you, Scott, for drawing our attention to it, but we did now include what was inadvertently omitted in our regulation for the sexual harassment 0110R to include the New York State human rights law in terms of what substantiates unlawful behavior with regards to sexual harassment. So that particular language was carried over from the policy to the regulation, so they are consistent. And that was the only change since last time. So thank you.
Thank you for addressing that.
I don't know if there are any other questions on any of the stuff.
No.
Okay. So we'll move on to the first read, and we'll talk about the first policy, policy 4532, entitled School Volunteers, Interns, and Student Teachers. This policy outlines the requirement for volunteers when spending any time in our district. Those volunteers could include student teachers, interns, observers, of course, parents. And it really just articulates the requirements in terms of completing of an application, to fingerprint requirement in order to ensure a positive background check. Of course, that does not pertain to our parents. Our parents are required to just check in with our security and provide an identification to verify who they are. Why we're bringing this policy forward is because we also wanted to include, in addition to the requirements that are currently in the policy, to add in the fact that our volunteers will now be asked to review our employee compliance training video that all our employees are responsible for reviewing every year, and that all of those policies related to sexual harassment, bloodborne pathogens, and now also to include the acceptable use policy. So that is the only revision to that particular policy, but we felt it was important to include the training for all our volunteers as well.
And then I'll talk about policy 1120 in the regulation and exhibit in that school district record. So we were looking at this policy and brought it forward because we've had some recent FOIL requests that included large volumes of information. And so Jen looked at this policy because there could be opportunities if there's lots of copying that needs to be done, that the district could charge for that, and we wanted to just see if this was updated for that purpose. So the policy itself, we only added...
Let me correct, not as much as opportunities to charge.
Not
Are we
opportunity.
doing the wrong thing and not charging?
Not charging,
Yeah.
or what is the cost, and has that changed? We hadn't updated the policy.
Don't need to correct, Tim.
Yeah, sorry, no,
Yep.
please correct me. And so we wanted to look at that. The policy itself, we only added a paragraph heading. It's the regulation, which we included more changes. And if you look at item number 3 in terms of fees, we just took out a lot of the details because that could change, and about there was just too much about storage and electronic materials, and we just noted that the fee is there that we haven't changed, and that's in the public access law. It's called Public Officers Law, which is a regulation around FOIL requests. And we just changed all that information. We deleted into any additional copy preparation fees or any additional costs will be applied as permitted by the Public Officers Law. That was just referencing the law instead of having all this detail about in the event of this and that. It was just confusing when we read it. So we wanted to simplify that piece. We also clarified under item number 4, request for information in terms of the timeline. We're governed by a timeline when someone makes a request. We have 5 days to respond to a FOIL request. And then from that 5 days, we have another 20 business days to acknowledge when we can get that information, give the information. And there was just a clarification whether that 20 days was from the date of the original request or from the acknowledgement by the district of the request. And it's from the acknowledgement by the district of the request. So we just clarified that language. And just a small change under the appeals submission process. So those were just the edits made in the regulation. And then we decided, and thank the policy committee for good thinking on this, we just wanted to delete the exhibit, which is a form to fill out if you want to access records. In our 20 years at district office, we've never had anyone complete the form. People just email us or send a letter sometimes. And anyone accessing information looks at our regulation, and it describes the process for how to request information. So no one ever uses the form, so we thought, why have it? So that's that policy. Any questions on 1120? And then I have regular meetings of the Board of Education and notice of meetings. So we received an update regarding the public's attendance at meetings, which is not required under extraordinary circumstances. You still have to post that the meeting's happening and have a place for the public to attend, but that you don't have to post where the location is and have, by attend, they can attend virtually and not always have a place under extraordinary circumstances where the public can actually come. So for example, it was the regulation where if you were at a hotel and you were coming into a board meeting that you would have to give the address of the hotel and the public could come to that. But if there had to be an extraordinary circumstance for a board meeting, we could just call that meeting for that circumstance, publicize where the link is for a virtual meeting, and the public could attend there and not have to come to the actual location. So we clarified that in this policy of notice of meetings. And then we also recognized that we had a policy on regular meetings that seemed confusing, so we integrated that into the notice of meetings. So we're recommending to delete regular meetings and just keep notice of meetings, which has the same information in there. So the new policy integrates that information from policy 2310. Any questions? I didn't confuse you, did I?
So if there was some type of emergency,
Yes.
where we had to quickly and we were scattered, then
Right.
that's what.
Exactly, right. Where previously, everyone would have to give their location and the public can come to any of those locations.
And that's only in the event of an emergency.
Yeah, right.
Maybe not of any of those.
Yeah.
And then finally, minutes of the Board of Education. We looked at this policy and made some updates and clarifications mainly, but again, putting in the same line about extraordinary circumstances, so that carried over to this policy, so that's why we looked at it. But then we also just clarified about the timeline of posting our minutes on the website, and if there are drafts, saying that it's a draft. However, you're supposed to update have a draft board minutes within, what is it, something like a day or something, isn't it? Within 1 week of an executive session. However, a video recording could act as the minutes, which we always put on our website, usually within 24 hours. So that acts as the minutes. Otherwise, there are procedures in there about the minutes that we do follow. So
Which is great, because nobody wants to put drafts on a.
Yeah, it seemed like we weren't in compliance, but we actually are. So we were happy that the board is in
We were scared and
compliance.
then elated.
Yes.
Yes.
So we did make some clarifications to that process, and when we look at policies, we always make sure we're in compliance as well. Is the language of the policy, and you are in compliance with posting the minutes, so just so the board knows. And that's all we have for you for the first read.
And did we go over the deletion of 11? We did 1120E. Did we do the
2310.
Yes, we did. What I mentioned, and you might have missed, I sort of didn't do it in order, but yes, we're deleting the regular meetings policy 2310, and the information from that policy is integrated into 2340, notice of
I
meetings.
see, okay, thank you.
We found that it was similar stuff in the two policies, and the policy 2310 is not a required policy. So we thought, let's have it in one policy and streamline
Okay,
it.
thank you for the clarification.
Same
So,
information.
Thank you so much.
Yep,
Can I
thanks.
have a motion then to approve a second read for 0110, 0110-R, 0110-E, 8505, 8110, 8220, and a first read of 4532, 1120, 1120-R, policy 2340, 2360, and do we approve the deletion as well? I guess we do, right? We
Yes.
approve the deletion of policy 1120-E and 2310. And a second? All those in favor? Thank you, and thank you so much to the policy committee and to Tim and Gina and Jen for their work on that. Okay, we move to 12 new business. We have none this evening. So we're going to move on to staff reports.
Yay, I'll stand for my staff.
Yay.
Student highlights. All right, Coleman Hill and Wampus, this is so great. I walked into Doug Mayer's class one day. They were working on preparing to go to Coleman Hill to go to their little second grade reading buddies. It's really a good way for our second graders to learn a little bit about Wampus, to look to kids who are a few years ahead, to watch the children who are a few years ahead embrace reading. I mean, what good role modeling. And they'll do it again. They look forward to getting together for another session. When I went into the classroom and was watching them prepare, Eric Huffnagel's kids were coaching each other when they were reading. They were saying, okay, but I think you should do this instead, or you're reading too quickly. It was just great to watch them prepare for it and then to execute it. Fantastic. Our middle school and Byram Hills High School Orchestra had a really great opportunity. This Sweet Plantain, the string quartet came. They worked with the students, and it was a lot of improv music. So they broke them up into small groups afterward and sort of taught them as musicians how they can improvise more, which was really well received by all of our students. A great crowd. We had our 8th grade through 12th graders. This was great. I mean, we can't stop celebrating these girls. After a while, you're going to tell me to stop talking, but our tennis championship parade, and just beautiful tonight to celebrate our students and again accolades to them. And our Bobcats who came out. I don't know why my picture is no longer there of Harley Rappaport. Oh, there it is. Good. I was not intending to do that.
When I think of leadership, I think of someone who all.
Thanks, Tim. So I just want to congratulate Harley, varsity field hockey. She was awarded Bobcat of the season for the fall of 2022. One of 2 athletes to receive this nomination. And the next one is George Jalaj, varsity football, also being awarded. And I encourage you to go to the website and watch those videos. They're great. And thank you so much to Brian Nelson and his team for putting that out.
BobcatTV.org.
BobcatTV.org. Just fantastic. Oop, here I go again. All right, and a go Bobcats. That's it. Before we watch any more videos.
Okay, thank you so much. Was that it, Jen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Back to Tim. You have nothing else?
Unless you want more? Another hour of literacy? I could do it.
I know you can. Okay, thanks so much. And then moving on, Kelly.
Just first budget hearing is in January 24th, and then we get to the budget process pretty much starting in March.
Thank you so much. Okay, quick board reports, anybody? We had a meeting of the, oh my God, you go first. Nope. Am I right?
I was just going to say very briefly, we had a Westwood event last night, and one of the, I think, interesting things that came out of it was an update on the electric bus initiative, which we all have to do, mandated by the state. And I think the moral of it is just to really focus on it, including the advocacy angle, because the price tag is huge.
Yep.
It's very complex, and and we're going to need to start thinking about what steps to take. So there are state resources, but I don't think they're enough.
And they outline the steps for us of first applying for a consultation, where they'll come in and they'll start to sketch out for you how long this process is going to take for your individual school district, which we'll take advantage of.
Yep. But I think we'll probably be spending a lot of time on this topic over the next
Yep.
few years.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Lori?
Me and I went to the sport liaison meeting recently, and we talked about, we had our student athletes come talk to us about what their needs are. Chris Walsh was present, and it was a very, very productive meeting, and we will continue the conversation. Report back.
Thank you.
And I also was at the BHEF meeting, and just to note that the auction is now open. So that's exciting, and I know that they're working on an annual appeal, and there was a lot of stuff going on there, so very exciting for our district.
Do they have a date yet for the gala?
They didn't say, so I don't know yet, but I'm sure we'll learn about that.
And similarly, the PTSA meeting happened. We were there as well, and there's just so much going on with the PTSA in every building. It's extraordinary what they do.
I don't remember the last time we've had such active groups, right? I mean, everyone there is incredibly active.
At least 3 years.
Yeah, yes. No, I mean it. I mean, it's like parents came out in full force.
I think everyone's very grateful to be back in the buildings.
And we're so grateful to have them.
Yeah, so it's wonderful.
It was so nice too to, be at Wampus and to see the parents who were volunteering to come in to help the kids work on recycling, and that pride that these kids have at Wampus in being able to distinguish where things go. One of the mothers turned to me and said, I think actually the kids know better than I do. Sometimes people ask me a question and then one of the kids answers and things are getting there. So
They love that
just
feeling of, empowerment. That's great. Okay. Let's see, we'll move on to 15, communications to the board. I didn't have any, there are none this go around. And, 16, can I get an approval of the board minutes? I didn't have anything. Did anybody have any? Okay, so can I have a motion and a second? All those in favor? Thank you. And then I guess a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Okay, thank you and good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.